Okay, welcome Ramon to our next session on decolonial theory. And today we are going to discuss the question of what is the vision for social movements in the global north of change? What are we fighting for in Europe, Latin America, Australia, New Zealand, the global north, Japan, even if you consider that part of the global north? What are social movements in those countries fighting for, according, let's say, to our decolonial theoretical framework that we are developing? Now, let me weigh in on this discussion by putting a few points forward. And I'll start with the main discussion we take up time and time again by looking at the difference between liberalism, Marxism, and decolonial theory. Because in my conception, decolonial theory is the alternative of the Enlightenment. And the philosophies of Enlightenment were liberalism and Marxism, where Marxism was within the Enlightenment, the opposition to liberal theory. Now, there are many aspects we are discussing in our series on what the differences are. And regarding the state, in our previous discussion, we came more or less to the conclusion that within Marxism and liberalism, they have one ideal form of state. In liberalism, that is the parliamentary system as a political system with the separation of powers. The socially is about the individual, liberation of individual. Economically is about capitalism, free market economy, private enterprises. Culturally is about the Enlightenment as and positivism basically as and Marxism within the Enlightenment came up economically with the theory of class and the mechanisms of exploitation within capitalism, where the market and private ownership of means of production enables capital to extract surplus value. So if you want a new system, you have to get away with the market, you have to get away with private enterprises, so you need a central planned economy with central planning as a basis and communal ownership of means of productions. And socially, it's not about the individual, but about the dictatorship of the proletariat. The socially is the proletariat, the working class that rules. Politically, there are systems which, based on the experience of the Soviet Revolution, would be the Soviets, the councils of workers and peasants. Basically, intellectually, it would be still the Enlightenment philosophy as a basis. And both have a worldview where the Western civilization is seen in a unilinear development of where Western civilization is the apex of human civilization. Now, in our previous discussions, we argued that this civilizational discourse is one of the basic elements of decolonial theory, that we argue that the Enlightenment and modernity has brought forward the civilization of death. And the question on the agenda for social movement is how to create a new world civilization. And how does it look like? And in terms of state structure, we look into the plurinational state, the discussions like in Bolivia on the plurinational state, where you don't have the nation state as a unit of, as a political unit. And because much of our discussion focused on Venezuela and Bolivia, a little bit on Iran, where revolutions change societies, we now focus on what does this civilizational approach means for the global north, for the social movement. Now, let's say the social movements which have come to the fore in the last few years, a lot of them is, of course, centered around the Black Lives Matter movement. And Black Lives Matter movement has major cross links between Europe and the United States. But if you look at the narrative of those movements, it is linked, what you see many of them in the academia, goes back to intersectionality, goes back to the critical race theory, and many of the theories that have been there for some decades, right? And also decolonial theory, you know, in the different movements, there are also people thinking about decolonial theory. But the aspect of decolonial theory in terms of fighting for a new world civilization is not yet part of those social movements. Now, in the United States, which is very interesting because the United States is the leader of this world civilization, is the leading empire. The others are followers. So if you talk about the United States and you talk about social movements, it's not the same as the social movement in Europe. The responsibilities of the social movements in the United States has to do with how do you view the leader of the world imperialism? How do you, what kind of demands do you put there? Now, what I found interesting in different analysis about social movements in the United States is, for example, the comparison of the Black Lives Matter movements with the civil rights movements in the 60s. I think we had one video with HRC where you and a brother from United States explained, an imam, what the differences was. And he had some interesting observation. One is that it was multiracial compared to the 60s, where there were whites involved in the 60s, but not on the scale of the demonstrations now, where large numbers of white youth are participating in the Black Lives Matter. Second difference was that it was combining the struggles of the different communities, the indigenous communities, Asians, Black communities, the role of women, which is much more profoundly proliferated in the new movements, and obviously the narrative here, where race is linked also to intersectionality. These are issues in the United States, and when it's translated into a struggle for political power, the platform of it were the elections for the state, for president, for Senate, etc. And there you see that the Democratic Party becomes the vehicle where many of the social movements try to explore something. So if they want to get across the Democratic Party, they have to stay within the basic framework and try to shift a little bit of that framework. For example, Octavio Cortés, who profiled himself as a democratic socialist, where democratic socialism took up the issue of socialism, and then socialism, which is not related to the Marxist movement, but to Sweden. Sweden is then seen as social democratic because the welfare state has succeeded there. There's a lot of intimidation because of the colonization of the mind in the United States, where as soon as you try to bring up the issue of socialism, the media jumps on Bernie Sanders, for example. When Fidel Castro died and he made a positive remark about Fidel Castro, everybody jumped on him and he had to go into the defensive. And that's the current climate. But at the same time, you see that surveys show that 70% of the youth in the United States now consider socialism as a viable alternative. The youth, the young people. So the colonization of the mind is not as big as the media would like to tell you. And the grip of the media on the mind of the people in a very distorted way is to be seen in the rise of Trump, where they don't trust the Trump people, although they are right-wing, etc., but they don't trust the regular media anymore. So there are big changes going on in the United States. Now, here's my point. If we want to develop ideas in the global north of what kind of program, of action, And what kind of change do we suggest? Then I think if you are in the United States, you have to take into account that the United States is the leading imperial power. So therefore, the mobilization in the United States can have different perspectives and characteristics than in, for example, in Europe. So take one big thing. In the United States, I think the social movements should link the military-industrial complex and the demise of the military-industrial complex, the need to dismantle the military-industrial complex as a major point, because attacking the military-industrial complex and linking it to the funds that unnecessarily is drawn from healthcare, housing, education to finance 800 military bases, which are in the United States, finance 6,000 nuclear weapons that are stored and maintained. And the need to put the question of the acceptance by the United States of its declining role in imperialism, and it should be a leading role in creating a new world civilization, which means the dialogue with Chinese intellectuals, which are now demonized. China is demonized in the United States, but put up a program of dialogue and with the those who are going to replace the United States, and in order to hasten that replacement, we should set up programs of the decline of the United States as a world power. So in order to, we have had discussions on all kinds of possibilities that are there, but putting that on the agenda in the United States and also in Europe, another world civilization, how does it look like? How do we get rid of the military-industrial complex that maintains this world civilization of death? How are we going about that? And then how does the candidates in the United States who are participating in elections, how do they bring that forward within political platforms and political programs, and then don't be intimidated by the media, but just carry forward? And at the end of the day, I think it will create enormous new possibilities for us. With the Biden administration coming in, I'm afraid that they will, it is a strange thing. Trump initially wanted to retract the United States from Iraq, Afghanistan, wanted to focus on developing the U.S. economy, but it was both in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party that he got resistance for it. So I'm afraid that the warmongers within the Democratic Party will take up that issue of trying to rule the world, although they're not in the position to do it anymore. And that's why social movement should focus on how to, within the Democratic Party and with the Democratic Party, the activists who are there, to focus on the need for the dismantling of the military-industrial complex. So this is my introductory remarks, Ramon.
Yes, basically this agenda was put forward by Martin Luther King before he was killed. Okay, his agenda was against poverty, against militarism, and against racism. So these were the 3 points he put forward, and he was linking the question of poverty in America with the question of the war in Vietnam and militarism, that is the industrial military complex, you know, or the military industrial complex. And that agenda is an inconclusive agenda. It's a unfinished agenda. We need to take it back again and put it forward, because what happened in the US is that everybody knows that the military-industrial complex eats up more than half of the budget of the US government. Everybody knows that the huge debt of the USA has to do with the amount of money invested in the Defense Department of the US, which in the end, it just end up in contracts with the military-industrial complex. Everybody knows how that the debt of US is due to all this money wasted in military-industrial complex. And, you know, Eisenhower in his last day of office, General Eisenhower, his last day of office as president of USA, he left a message that you can see it in the video in YouTube, where he calls attention. It's like a moment where it's his last day in office. He's not, you know, he's old. And it was a moment like of, what can I say to the American public in my last day that could be useful? And he came out in an honest, truthful way, you know, because you imagine General Eisenhower is one of the architects of the military-industrial complex, and of the 8 years of his presidency in the 50s was the years of McCarthyism, the years of the consolidation of the Cold War, the years of the building of the military-industrial complex, and all this stuff, you know. So here you have a president who was a general of Second World War, and he had a military career, who became president for 8 years in the 1950s. In his last day, he said to the American public, beware of the military-industrial complex, because it's going to destroy American democracy. It's going to destroy a lot of the institutions, existing institutions. And this is exactly what happened. I mean, the last 60 years, is what he said in that speech is exactly what happened. Military-industrial complex, colonized all the agenda, all the resources, everything in the US, okay? And so there is a Dominican intellectual, Juan Bosch, who wrote a book in the 1960s talking about the Pentagon. He called it something like Pentagonismo, higher stage of imperialism, okay? Where he's saying that the Pentagon became like a higher state, because in the Pentagon you have the fusion of everything, militarism, imperialism with financial capital and industrial capital, everything there with military industries. And if there are no wars, they invent a war, because they need wars to justify the budget, to keep the budget increasing. You know, so there are a big lobby. They're the most powerful lobby in Washington, okay? So a lot of the money is lost there, and together with Wall Street, with the, you know, tax evasion of Wall Street. So that's why the US has the highest debt in the world today. And that's why the US is in a very, very difficult position, because these two elites, the military and financial elite, have basically eat up all the resources without giving back anything in terms of income taxes or anything like that, you know? And so in the US, there's no welfare state. There's never been something like a welfare state, but there is a corporate welfare state, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That is, the state works directly, transferring resources to, for example, the military-industrial complex, all these military industries. All these contracts is transfer of wealth from the American public and taxpayers to, and so this is a form of corporate welfare. So in the US, there's no people's welfare.
Mm-hmm.
There's no national health system. It's all privatized. There's no national public educational system. It's all decentralized according to the property taxes of counties. So you can imagine how unequal the educational system is. If you happen to be born in the right place at the right time, you get the property taxes of your community, get a great high school. If you are in a place where the property taxes of the community are very low, you get a very bad education in high school. All this thing is, the public education system is linked to the county's property taxes and not to a national budget of the education. And there's no public housing system. Everything is privatized in terms of housing. So what I'm trying to say is that there is corporate welfare, but not people's welfare, okay? Now, the politics inside the USA, the contestation, okay, happened fundamentally in the 1960s revolution, okay? The 1960s revolution was a revolutionary moment against the war in Vietnam, where you have a lot of the white Jews mobilized against the war of Vietnam. And of course, the civil rights movement and the movement that came out of the civil rights, Black Power, the Black Power movement, the Black Panthers Party. Then you have the Weather Underground, which was more a white, militant, leftist underground movement that came out from the 60s struggles. And then you have many leftist movements emerging from the 1960s. But all of that was politically defeated through two mechanisms: cooptation, that is by co-opting the leaders of many of these movements, and repression by the bullets. So you have people incarcerated with long-term sentences, some of them still in jail after 40, 50 years, from both the Panthers, all these movements. No? And then you have also people from that were killed, literally killed. Many militants of the Panthers were killed by the FBI. Okay, the FBI was behind the killings of many of the leaders of the 60s. Military intelligence of the USA was behind all this stuff. If you want to read more about this, I suggest the book An Act of State. It documents the military intelligence in direct involvement of military intelligence in the killing of Martin Luther King. That book was published by Verso in London, and it's written by the lawyer who did the investigation of the guy who was falsely accused of killing Martin Luther King. Because in all these killings, they always find the lonely knot who they blame for the killing. So they always find a lonely knot that, oh, this is a crazy guy who killed this person. In fact, these were all organized with the active participation of the state, all these killings in the 60s. JFK, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. I mean, you go over the list, but not only them. There are a lot of other, dozens of other activists killed by the FBI, okay? There was a counter Interpol, I think it was the name of the program in the FBI, where they were
Counterpro. Mm-hmm.
Counterpro. Yes, something like that. And they were basically, these documents are today accessible. They are declassified, so we know these people were after the head of many activists who were killed, and so this is how they destroy the movement. They destroy the movement. The left movement, this is what I mean. And then most of the demands of the social movements that continued to develop over time because the social movements, although there was a crisis in the late 70s, early 80s, they came back with a force after that. And so you have a lot of movements that kept going and alive in the USA, addressing many issues of militarism, imperialism, racism, patriarchy, you name it, you know, all these different movements. But, and they usually, we don't know about them because they're not in the front page of any newspaper, okay? So all these movements are there and have been there, but they're channeled, their demands are politically channeled through the Democratic Party. And here is the problem. The Democratic Party is part of this imperialist system. The Democratic Party is controlled by financial capital. The Democratic Party is also controlled by the military-industrial complex, like the Republicans. I mean, there's no difference. The way it works in the USA is that these lobbies, like let's say the military-industrial complex, they put money in the campaign of both parties. So they never lost. Imagine how powerful it is, the lobby of the military-industrial complex, that USA had the largest debt of the world, okay? USA, the federal government have a trillionaire debt of $27 trillion, okay? And it's so powerful, the military-industrial complex, that nobody dares in Congress to suggest, like, even the question, don't you think we should cut the budget of the Defense Department at least in half and use some of that money for resources for the people or to pay the debt, right? Nobody dares to put even the question there because the way it works is similar to AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, which is that if any Congress person or senator attempts to go against their interests, in the next election, they put a candidate with millions of dollars for publicity against you in the next election. It's like a punishment by exemplar, okay? So they've done that several times, where everybody knows that if you go against these people, you're going to face, in the next elections, a runner against you with a huge budget that will beat you up, okay? And that's how it works. So they have the resources, they have the money and they put the money in both Republican and Democrats. So it's a win-win situation. It doesn't matter who wins. They have the control over the resources, over the politicians. And in Washington, like in Brussels, it's legal to do lobbies like this. That is, you can take a senator and pay him a vacation in the Bahamas, okay, with his family to the electoral campaign. You can overtly, private corporations can buy the vote of politicians in the US Congress. US is the most corrupt country in the world, and Brussels is the same. People in Europe doesn't know that Brussels operates like Washington, DC, where you have these lobbies of corporations transferring resources to the politicians and to the technocrats so they get the policies that they want. So in a sense, in that famous debate between Miliband and Poulantzas about the state among the Marxists back in the 70s, where Poulantzas was talking about the state as a structure, okay? And Miliband was, that the way the state works for capitalism is more structural than the direct control of the elites, capitalist elites over the state. And then Miliband was saying, no, the way it works is that the capitalist elites instrumentalize the state to their own interests, okay? So in that debate, it's a very interesting debate that, people should look at. I think that Miliband has a point. Both have a point, I think. Both of them are very interesting and I have a point, but the Miliband point should not be underestimated because There is an active agency of blocks or fractions of capitalists actively involved in producing the policies of the state they want. So this is a very important point because you could see very clearly in the US how the military industrial complex have shaped the policies of the USA and even the budget of the USA, to the point that more than 50% of the budget of USA goes to them, okay? Now, given this context, the problem social movements face is the problem of that there's no, right now, political force that could challenge the bi-party structure of domination of the USA. Right now, everything is, let's say, social movement demands as well as sort of leftist reforms are channeled inside the Democratic Party. And that's a big limitation because the Democratic Party is what it is, and it's not going to be different. Look at just Sanders. Sanders is a social democrat. It's not even a radical leftist or anything like that. And they haven't allowed him, I'm listening, I'm telling you literally, they haven't allowed him to be a candidate. I'm saying they haven't allowed him because in 2016, they did a lot of manipulation inside the party to destroy his candidacy vis-a-vis Hillary Clinton. This was a scandal back in 2016. That's how the Democratic Party mobilized to destroy his candidacy. Even though he had a potential to become the candidate, he has the votes, they destroy him. And they did the same now in 2020 to discard him as a candidate. Even though in 2016, all the surveys show that the Democrats will win the election if they have Sanders as a candidate and not Hillary Clinton. But they still prefer Hillary Clinton with the risk of losing the election than having Sanders, because Sanders was too radical for them, even though it was kind of a mild social democrat, okay? So this is a big limitation because in order to challenge the power, I mean, for a decolonial project that is looking for the foundation of a new civilization, that is looking for a transformation, the question of state power becomes a central question. You cannot just be all your life protesting in the streets as a reactive force, because you'll be there forever if you don't positively change the structures of domination and power. So for the taking over of the state, be that through smashing the state and creating a new state, or be that through occupying that state, like some of the experiences in Latin America have done, that is actually been the agenda in terms of the 21st century. There's no way social movement, be that some of them decolonial, some of them are not decolonial, but social movement going against imperialism, capitalism, patriarchy, and racism, they have to have a political channeling of their demands. And that political channeling has to be taking seriously the question of state power. It cannot be that you are always in the streets reacting to what they do against you and then trying to channel your discontent through the Democratic Party. It's not going to go anywhere, this. There has to be in the agenda the formation of a political force that will be, in a sense, multinational, because working classes in the US are multinational. It has to be, of course, anti-imperialist, have to have that as a center, and of course, anti-racist. The anti-patriarchal question should be there, but what happened is that for example, take the intersectionality. I mean, I am one that have supported the question of multiple oppressions, you know, that we need to look and tackle the multiple oppressions. But the problem is that how intersectionality in the US has turned into a kind of crazy identity politics of the Olympics of oppression. Like, you know, it has turned into a depoliticized, culturalist, identitarian question instead of becoming, I mean, Black feminists, when they use the term intersectionality or they talk about multiple oppression, like the term interlocking, that I find it more useful than intersectionality. This concept, we're always calling attention to multiple oppression because they were calling attention to build coalitions, to cross bridges, to make united fronts of the multiple people oppressed. That was the idea. It was not about Olympics of oppression. It was not about, oh, I have 5 oppression, I am more oppressed than you, and I have more authority than you to speak, etc. I mean, that's how it has turned, and it has turned a kind of a movement, an arm, a weapon of mass destruction of social movements. And this is not only in the US, in many parts of the world, I've seen this happening, where it's get distorted from the original position of the Black feminists in the US, who were calling for coalitions, for alliances, for building bridges between the different oppressed people, not for an Olympics of oppression. That was not the aim of these concepts. And now it has turned into this. So you go in the US and you look at this, and it turns into crazy identity politics in many movements that implode. Not now, in many places, you don't only, even the state have done a lot of repression. For example, Black Lives Matter, you could see this year how much repression was mobilized there. But there are movements that also, they don't need the repression to implode, because among themselves, fighting each other, they just turn into this craziness of intersectionality as Olympics of oppression, misunderstood as that, end up imploding the movements. And so I'm saying this because this is just going to intensify. That is, the contradiction with the state is just going to intensify in the 21st century. Either we build a political project, or we're going to be forever in the streets reacting to what they're doing. We need to build a political project that takes into consideration the question of state power, and that have a positive agenda that is not just a reactive agenda, but a positive agenda about the building of a new civilization. Okay?
Okay.
And yes.
No, finish it and then I'll come in.
No, we can continue as a conversation. Right. Yes.
Okay. So I think that here at this point, if I evaluate the historical development of political struggle in the United States, what we have seen with the Sanders experience, with the triumph of Trump on Hillary Clinton, with the recent elections, what it shows you is that the system has become fundamentally unstable. It doesn't have the stability it used to have in the past 50 years, where the Democrats and the Republicans could inter-exchange. Basically, they have the same policies. Mm-hmm. But now, social movements are expressing themselves in different ways, even in the Trump campaign. Because the masses of people who are expressing their support for Trump, you could see as a kind of social movement there, which is social movement in the sense that people want change, and they have been guided in an extreme right-wing direction for change. But behind that was change in terms of, we don't want wars. We didn't want, they have America's great, etc., but it was a reaction against the establishment also. So that's one point. So point is the fact that Sanders was possible. The fact that he was there, even that he lose, shows the instability of the Democratic Party. The fact that there are other candidates, left-wing candidates through the Democratic Party, They are being co-opted, right, but they are there. And that tells you one thing, is that because of this instability, it tells me that we don't think in terms of years, it could be a few decennia, but the decline of the United States creates an opportunity for a third political force in the United States, a political party. Now, the Black Lives Matter movement has one interesting thing. It had a slogan, defund the police. And there are many discussions on it, but I think the new social movement, which should be articulated sooner or later in a political party in the United States, should have the main slogan, defund the military-industrial complex. Because with that slogan, defund the military-industrial complex, all the discussions will come. The discussion about the empire, discussion about the budget, this discussion about what kind of society do you want, the discussion about the rise of the West and the decline of the West. All these discussions, through the notion of defund the military-industrial complex, I think it should be possible to build a new social movement that culminates in a political party that can challenge on a local election, on state elections, on the national elections. But you need to have people in the United States that have this decolonial vision of a new world civilization. Take up the slogan of defund the military-industrial complex and build around it the social movement where the academics, for example, who spend a lot of time in researching intersectionality, should go into researching this concept of defund the military-industrial complex, what this means and everything which is around it. There should be academic programs on it. There should be webinars on it, and they should connect to how to have the decolonial dialogues from the United States with the people in the global South, with people in China. So I think we are at a crossroad in the United States where the opportunities are better than 20 years ago. So I think
definitely,
that is one
thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing is that I agree completely. But the thing is, this question about defund the military industrial complex have been posed several times in the past. But what I'm trying to tell you is that these have to be developed from the streets. That is what Martin Luther King tried to do, was to link poverty in America, including white poor people or white working classes, economic conditions, bad economic conditions back in the 60s, to the militarism, to the war in Vietnam and all the waste of resources going there. And he tried to put a coalition that was broad. Look what happened. They killed him, right? And the FBI, Hoover, is on record basically threatening him and telling him, don't link the question of civil rights to the Vietnam War. Don't link poverty to the Vietnam War. Okay? I mean, that's the red line. He was basically threatening him before they kill him. And so this is all of this is on record. I'm not saying
there's a tradition there.
That's a tradition.
Yeah, there's a tradition. Also, Malcolm X, when he put civil rights and transformed it into human rights. You see,
yes,
put it on the international agenda. So there is a tradition in the United States where you could build on and take it.
Yes.
So
yes, I agree with you completely. The only thing is that so far the military industrial
Okay, something is going wrong here with the connection, Ramon. So let me finalize it and come back to the question of how is the social movement in the United States going to develop the coming decades? Right, Ramon.
Hello.
We just had a technical problem, but let me summarize where we are now and how to move forward. I think the fact that we now see that decolonial theory offers a complete new perspective on social struggle in the United States, where it says that we should put the issue of the world civilization on the agenda, new world civilization, link it to the decline of the American imperialism, link it to the disintegration of the political system that's taking place in the United States, argue for a new political force that is able to challenge the two main forces, knowing that it will be very difficult and complex, but that there is a tradition where they can build on, and culminating it in the slogan of defend the military-industrial complex. I think that could offer very interesting projects for the future, you know, where obviously there will be a lot of resistance against this type of arguments, but that's always the case with social movements. The initial vanguard have to be prepared to take all these blows, but at the end of the day, we see in the civil rights movement, we see in the Black Lives Matter movement, a slogan could be very powerful. You know?
Yes.
Black Lives Matter, the slogan was very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This is the way to go. I agree completely. Just to what I was trying to say when it was cut off is that the even politicians who are in favor of defunding the military-industrial complex, the Defense Department, haven't been able to even propose it on the floor of the Congress. That's how powerful it is. When something is not even said, verbally said, not even as a question. Okay, don't you think we should cut off some of this huge budget of Defense Department? Nobody put it even as a question. That tells you how powerful it is. So I'm saying this not to say that we shouldn't fight back and do this. I'm just saying that this is, right now, the social movements are at a very weak position because they've been co-opted constantly by the Democratic Party. I mean, even Black Lives Matter. Look at the language used in the campaign by Biden. You know, he's using many of the slogans of Black Lives Matter when we know he already is on record saying he's not going to defund the police. Okay, they're not going to go all the way. They're just going to co-opt the slogans in order to win elections and keep going with business as usual. And this is the challenge we have in the USA, how to build not just social movement, but a political, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist movement that will challenge the empire from within. That's the challenge. And for that, you need broad coalitions. You need to deal with the question of racism inside the movements, because that's one of the main things they've used. Look at how a lot of working class people, white working classes, have taken a side with Trump as a way to channel their discontent because they're being, in a sense, co-opted by extreme right agenda through what? Through the ideology of racism. So instead of fighting the system, they're fighting a worker that is in a worse situation than them. You know, a Latino migrant or a black worker or whatever, you know? So this is what is happening in the USA. The question of racism is a central question that have maintained the power that be in place and that have maintained the movement split and divided in 100 fragments without being able to pull up a coalition like Jesse Jackson tried to do back in the 80s. He tried to do a rainbow coalition, you remember, but always inside the Democratic Party. And so that's not going that far anyway.
All right. I think it's a good point you make. Let's try to continue the discussion next time and compare it with Europe.
Okay.
So now we have done it for the United States. Let's discuss the social movement and what this means for Europe, because Europe is not the leading imperial power, but it plays a role in it. And the social movement in Europe are somewhat different than the United States, you see? So we'll take it up for the next time. Thank you very much, Ramon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, take care, man.